Welcome back to Rethinking Politics. Here for episode 98, you've got your favorite podcast host, Brad, and Dan's here as well. And we're happy to be bringing some content to you guys today, which, as we've already established, is Dan's new favorite word.
I hate that word.
Before we get into it, though, Dan, I thought I'd take a moment to say, this is episode 98, so we're getting real close to that 100 mark. And we need a way to celebrate. And I don't know what we should do to celebrate. I don't know if we should do some kind of giveaway or I don't know. We should make an episode without us saying anything stupid. But whatever it is, we got to do something. So if you guys have any ideas, go ahead and email us or message us on Facebook or something and say, hey, here's what you should do to celebrate 100 episodes, because I at least am open to input.
Let me give one suggestion that people should throw out there and back me up on. I think Brad should do an interpretive dance. And if you want to see Brad do an interpretive dance, just comment or email or something like that and let us know.
So there is bad news. Unfortunately, after a run of 98 episodes, we are ending the podcast. It's been a good run. We may do one more episode, but that'll be it.
You wanted good ideas, and I had one, and you're just gonna call it. I see.
You're gonna shut it down.
I see how this works.
Seriously,
content.
Though,
I'm still bothered by that.
Reeling.
We're not bringing you content. We're bringing you useful information, a view from which to see the world and interpret the complexity of politics and economics, and thoughtful insights and occasional jokes and a lot of Brad. I'll let you decide whether that's good or bad.
Before we get too sidetracked and we ramble on for the first 20 minutes, we want to actually say what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we'll do that later.
Exactly. We are going to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, aka the Schumer Manchin bill, which it's more widely known as. Apparently, it's their bill. President Biden had nothing to do with it. I don't even know what he's doing there, over in DC. But Schumer and Manchin are doing good work.
As we joke to ourselves, is Manchin president? He seems to have all the power. We'll get into why that is a little bit later in terms of why it's their bill and not necessarily Biden's.
Exactly. But before we do that, let's talk about what's actually in the bill. So this bill has been brewing for a little bit, but overnight, They came to an agreement, and they now have a working bill that is cleared to pass the House, and so it just needs to clear the Senate. And clearing the Senate is, funnily enough, less about votes, because everyone pretty much knows how everyone's going to vote. It's going to be a pretty party line vote. So it's less about votes and more about process, because there's different ways for the bill to get passed, and if it can be a straight party vote, they'll win that vote. But if the Republicans can block it in many other ways, legislation can be blocked, then they can't get it through.
Yes, we've mentioned this in the past, but the Senate has rules, particularly the Senate, as every legislative body in general does. Not all of the rules are prescribed by the Constitution, so as a legislative body, they create a lot of the rules that govern them themselves. And this is how almost every legislative body works this way. And one of them is that unless you have 60 people, you can't end discussion.
Yeah, because people may be asking, well, if you have the majority, why can't you pass legislation? It's like, yes, you can. It's a matter of timing. You can pass it, but it may take you a few years because we won't stop talking about it.
Yes, it's the result is that, practically speaking, you can stall out almost indefinitely, and maybe even indefinitely. I don't know if they're, like you said, it as far as I know, you can stall out indefinitely, but there's a limit. Maybe eventually you'll get an opportunity.
There are ways and exceptions to get around that. And I am not a congressional expert. You're welcome. And so I don't have...
Thank you.
Really, it was just me being glad I'm not a congressional expert because it's such a mess. But so right now they're gunning for using one of those exceptions so that they can just do a majority vote and get it passed. And if they can do that, if they can get past those legislative rigmarole, then this thing will get passed. So that is definitely a real possibility. It may not happen, but it's already gone farther than Build Back Better, from a year ago that Biden was trying to get through, or maybe 6 or 7 months ago. What was it, the fall, Christmas last year, sometime around then?
It feels like a long time ago, but I guess I don't know exactly.
While we're talking about legislative rigmarole, I want to talk about why it's called the Manchin-Schumer bill and why these people matter so much. You were like, why do we keep talking about individual congressmen, and why were they able to hold up the legislation? I mean, you remember a while ago when we were talking about Build Back Better, and we were talking about Manchin and Sinema, two Democrats who caused a lot of ruckus and made Build Back Better basically die before it could get its legs underneath it. And the reason, they're able to do this, you pointed out, Dan, that Manchin is actually the chair of a committee that this bill has to go through. In other words, before this can even get to the floor of the House, it has to go through this committee, and committees are fascinating because there are about 1 million ways you can kill a bill in committee. In other words, it doesn't matter if 80% of Congress wants a bill passed. If the committee doesn't want that bill to make it to Congress, there are many things they can do to stall or stop it. And so they had to get Manchin on board in order to have this bill make it anywhere.
Yes, these committees are so influential. You can think of them as a legislature before the legislature. So you have this little body made up of, I guess I don't know how many they are in the Senate. It's probably no more than 10, I would guess. I don't know. That's actually, so I'm thinking about it. So various states have various numbers of congressmen and senators, and it's up to the states how they do it. And I've seen different states do it differently. And I don't know exactly on how big these committees are. I would guess in the House, the committees are huge because there's a ton of members of the House. But in the Senate, they can still be relatively small. We've got 100 senators. And they will deliberate over these bills prior to the bill, as Brad was saying, going to the floor of the Senate. And the floor of the Senate, in case you don't recognize that term, that's where the whole group considers it. That's the main group that we think of when we think of the Senate. That's everybody, and everybody gets a vote, and everybody's equal. That's not the case in the committee. In the committee chairman has a massive amount of power over what is even discussed. Kind of I suppose in the same way as the Senate president does, or the Senate majority leader, I guess. The Senate president is the vice president. And in practice, he or she does almost nothing.
Yeah. And the Congress is not a dictatorship. There are many people who have power. You've got, like you said, the leadership. You've got these committees. You've got other committees that control those committees, like rules committees and things like that. And so you have to work with all of these people in order to get things passed. And so in this case, the people who were, the key instruments is Manchin, over in the House, the committee, and then Schumer over on the Senate side. The Senate, I believe he's the Senate minority leader. He's the Senate Democratic minority leader, which is a slim minority. I don't know what the numbers are. Dan.
You mean majority in the Senate?
Is it majority? What's the split in the Senate right now, Dan?
So the split in the Senate right now is 50-50. But because the vice, I assume this is why, I don't know why exactly, but I assume because the vice president is a Democrat and the vice president gets a vote, if a vote is 50-50 and it's even, then the vice president gets to vote as the president of the Senate to decide the tiebreaker.
So really what you're saying is that he shouldn't be called the Senate Majority Leader. We should have had a Senate half-ority leader for the Democrats and a Senate half-ority leader for the Republicans.
Half-ority leaders?
Uh-huh.
Because there is no majority, technically.
Because he doesn't actually have a majority or a minority. He has a half-ority. So I'm going to propose that change is made. But in the meantime, yes, technically, he is the majority leader. And in effect, with the 51 votes, it is the majority party, but just barely.
Yeah, because they will win a 50-50 tie.
But it also helps you understand that in this case, it's not just Schumer who has that power. It's every single Democratic senator. Because every single Democratic senator has to be on board with this legislation, or it won't make it to the Senate.
Any one of them
unless
can
you
kill
can
it.
go across the aisle. Mm-hmm. Which is going to be a hard push right now because Republicans are really enjoying Biden floundering. And so the more they can keep him doing it, even if you as a Republican liked the bill, you'd be hard-pressed by the rest of your party to vote against it just to keep him floundering.
And you probably won't get elected next time. The pressure right now to vote as one body is massive.
Yeah, exactly, because that is where their power is, stay as that block. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so it's definitely interesting because this is supposed to be President Biden's, reduced big moment. This is not Build Back Better. This is not a $3 trillion bill like he wanted, but it's something like $700 billion in total. It's still a big bill. It's still an accomplishment. It's something that I didn't see coming. But in many ways, the thunder is being stolen by Manchin and Schumer. This is their bill in the eyes of many, not President Biden's.
Even though it does include some of the things in Build Back Better, that's obviously the inspiration for it. And to some degree, this is the product of Build Back Better being negotiated down to a few specific topics like climate and some healthcare things.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It is President Biden's plan. You know what I mean? This is what he was trying to do. He's taking credit for this, but no one's really noticing. Anyways.
No one wants... He can't buy a break to save his life, it feels like, from anybody.
Poor guy. But I mean, plus he has cancer now, so things are looking real bad.
Yeah. According to him. According to the White House, he doesn't, but who knows? So funny to me.
Just a little sad. Teasing Biden. Don't worry about it.
So sad.
Okay. So let's talk about the pieces of this bill. So this bill is primarily, I'd say, a three-pronged bill. You got climate reforms, climate change agenda. You've got, that's the first one. You've got some healthcare reforms, specifically around Medicare. And then you've got a plan to raise taxes on the evil corporations. So let's go through those 3 points one at a time. How's that sound, Dan?
Let's do. And just a friendly reminder, because maybe you can figure it out. We couldn't. This is called the Inflation Reduction Act. If you can figure out why, let us know. The names of these bills are so misleading. They can name it whatever they want. The name has no impact on the law. No impact on anything. In fact, it doesn't even go into the law, right? The actual text that's changed in the law is unrelated to the name of the act and bill. So you can call it whatever you want. This has nothing to do with inflation and will not reduce inflation.
Yeah. Calling it is insane. There's I've got a Yahoo Finance article talking about this. It may be from somewhere else because I said I've seen the same. Yeah, it's Washington Post, but you can't get into Washington Post. So they've got the same article for free in case you don't like spending money on things that you can get for free.
we found that you can do this with a variety of things lately. I found another one on the
why put it behind a paywall and then give it to your competitors who will then put it out for free? I don't know. I'm assuming they're paying them for it, but clearly it can't be too much since they're not charging for it. You know what I mean?
I'm happy if Yahoo wants to pay for my membership to various journals.
Yeah,
that's
basically.
Fine.
I'm okay with that. And in exchange, we'll acknowledge that Yahoo still exists. That's all they want.
That is. I saw one from MSN. It's like, what?
They're like, hey, we're still around. Anyways, so I've got this quote from Jason Furman, who we are all familiar with him. He was a senior economist in the Obama administration. And here's his quote about the legislation. So this is an article that's been read by a lot of people, anyone who reads Washington Post or Yahoo. If it sticks, this will be a huge policy win for the White House and the country, addressing both the president's number one short-run issue of inflation and the number one long-run issue, climate change. That is an amazing and absolutely stupid quote. First of all, it's not going to do either of those things, but at least one of those things is trying to address climate change. There's nothing in here to address inflation. And they'll make some weak arguments about how, well, doing these things. No. I think I heard something about. No, I can't even talk about it. It's so stupid. There's nothing here that's going to address inflation. Even the Fed putting on the brakes hard hasn't fixed inflation yet. So and fixed inflation yet implies that they will fix inflation, which they won't. Anyways.
No, inflation will it'll sort itself out, but it's not the Fed.
Yeah, and inflation will slowly remedy itself. Unless the government does something egregious again, but who knows?
Yeah, as people adjust to the new supply and demand for money. Yeah.
So let's talk about that first big claim, which is climate change. So this bill is supposed to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, which is, 7.5 years away. So that's incredibly ambitious. And you're like, well, how are they going to do that? And they're like, they're going to do it the way we always have. Rebates for electric vehicles. And if that doesn't fix it, we're also going to give rebates for solar panels. And if that doesn't fix it, we're going to have new credits to incentivize solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. And that's it. That is basically it. They're going to be putting $260 billion in the clean energy tax credits. Those are the ones they're going to be incentivizing renewable energy. So solar, wind. I mean, who are we kidding? It's solar and wind. Hydroelectric is amazing, and it's good, and it's not what people are going to be building, because typically where hydroelectric can be done, it's being done for the most part. And
right, it's just
wind
not
and
something you
solar
can
is
do
where
anywhere.
people are going to be investing their money. Wind and solar, we've talked about these before. I don't hate wind and solar. If I had the money for it, I wouldn't mind having some self-sufficiency and having some solar panels or having, wind power in my backyard as an alternative,
Uh-huh.
But when you talk about a grid, it becomes a different problem. We all remember when the Texas grid had serious issues that was blamed on their independence. And it is partially because of their independence, but part of it was because they had serious incentives for renewable energy. And as a result, you had these huge wind, power generation that is fickle. And you had a large power surge. It was cold. People were trying to stay warm. And wind was not producing significant amounts of energy. And the fossil fuel plants that had been reduced because you had this huge increase in something else couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
And that is the boogeyman of renewable energy is that future is we don't have any kind of significant battery system for a grid. You want to get a Tesla battery bank for your house. It's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. In order to get a Tesla battery bank for the grid, which is so much more, would be a very large number. And it would be a battery that wouldn't last forever. You know what I mean? You couldn't just spend that money once and be done. You'd have to spend that money periodically to replace that. And no one's willing to do that because solar and wind are already expensive. You add a huge new cost on top of that. And even with all these credits, it's not even close to reasonable. And the crazy thing about these credits is they don't factor these things in. They just say, hey, we're going to make it cheaper for you to invest in these things. I mean, the Texas grid was amazing because how it was set up was if someone wants energy, we're going to buy energy, and the first people we will buy it from is wind every time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We will buy from wind, and then if wind's not selling anymore, then we'll buy from everyone else. Which means, why wouldn't you build a wind turbine? Because it could be dead of night, and you could have 20% power needs for the state. And as long as you're producing wind, it'll be bought. You know, everyone else may suffer, but you will always be in business.
Is that what wind turbines do? They produce wind?
Is that what I said?
Yeah, I'm just teasing you. I know. I understood what you meant. Yeah, as long as the wind is producing power.
So what you do is you have your wind turbines that produce power, but they need wind to do it. So what you do is you build other wind turbines farther down that produce wind to then power those turbines.
You've got a giant fan.
Exactly. I'm a thinker.
That's blowing into your wind turbines. Wait a second.
and these are not criticisms of the energy alternatives as an energy alternative. They're criticisms of how they're being applied in the grid, and it's not being applied well. And the problem with these tax credits is tax credits don't look at the big picture. They're just skewing incentives.
Yes, they incentivize something that may or may not be the wise call. They make it seem wiser than it should be by making it more profitable than it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Then if you had left it to itself to respond to the reality on the ground, the numbers would be very different. Now, one of the interesting points about this is if you want perfectly reliable systems, you have to be prepared to supply 100% of the needs with non-renewable energy. And the reason is very simple, because sometimes the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow.
Mm-hmm.
And during those times, if you need X amount, it has to all be supplied through other means, which means to add wind and solar,
you have to duplicate
and make it perfectly reliable. You have to have redundant systems. You have to duplicate. You have to create more.
You have to have one power system to create reliable power and one system to create renewable power.
Yes. And if you think that that's ever going to be less you end up needing, if you're going to make it reliable, you end up needing exactly the same amount of fossil fuel things.
Well, at least fossil
but you're
fuel
not consuming
plants.
it.
Yes,
yeah, you're not
exactly.
consuming as much.
You may be
because
consuming less fossil fuels, or you should be consuming less fossil fuels.
Yes, but overall, you've made the entire system simply way more expensive.
Yeah, and then you have to factor in the environmental costs of all the environmental, the renewable energy production. I mean, solar energy is not net zero. You know what I mean? There are costs.
Yes.
And they may describe it as net zero, but that's always because they're looking at it after the fact. For the life of the solar, it pays for itself theoretically. But not
they've defined out all the costs.
Yeah, these numbers aren't as simple as they make it out to be. It's not as clear cut as it is, because if it were, I'd be in favor of it. You know what I mean? If we had a solution where we could just slap this on and all our problems would be solved, and it would make us more environmentally friendly, let's do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for $260 billion, that's not a terrible price to pay. You know what I mean? But that's not what's happening here.
Yeah. So green energy is by default more expensive, but then you're also going to have to pay taxes to set up the non-renewable energy system. And the result is that if you want to use green energy as often as possible, and that's what we're incentivizing, you're going to have to pay a lot more for energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty straightforward. I think most people probably know that, but we're not talking just a little bit more. We're talking quite a bit more. We're not talking like 5% more.
And of course, this begs the question, if you actually want renewable energy that's not a duplication, there's a reasonable solution, which is a nuclear power plant that produces a set amount 24/7.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
So you can have the consistency.
You can't do 100% replacement, but you could do some replacement where it is saying, hey, night and day, we will always produce this power for you.
Yeah.
Which is so much better than wind and solar.
Yeah, I really think that we picked up our views of energy, like a lot of the popular opinions about the way energy works are stuck in the same ideas that came up in the 70s and 80s, and that we haven't moved past it. Yet we still have no sense of of what we know now and what we've learned since then about nuclear
there are nuclear reactor systems, Dan, and if you want to hear more about this, talk to my wife because she raves about it. Which is these feeder
We'll put her
systems.
phone number in the notes.
Yes, it's going to have her phone number, her email,
her name. Just text her if you want to chat.
Just text her. Here's her Facebook. You know, just go nuts, guys. But anyways, talking about these feeder systems where they can actually use the same nuclear materials and recycle them over and over and over again, theoretically forever. You know, so that there are nuclear power plants that cost more to set up in the beginning that are renewable energy by the strictest definitions.
That's trippy.
It is trippy.
I haven't heard about that.
Because it's changed, because the technology has changed.
Yeah, and it should have changed faster. I mean, we haven't experimented with it nearly as much as we should have because we were scared, and we were rightfully scared to some degree. I'm not saying all of our fear is unwarranted. It certainly was, especially early on.
I was about to say, can we just say that 90% of our fears were unwarranted?
Yes. We really panicked with things like Chernobyl. We really, really freaked out. But at this point, all of the fear is unwarranted. Or at least 99% at this point is unwarranted. Yeah, so there's so many things we could talk about with climate. I was really worried when I read, you mentioned it at the very beginning, when they said they were going to decrease it 30 to 40% of all CO2 emissions. I was scared. I thought they were going to create some kind of regulatory body that was just going to start dropping the hammer on people polluting. But what they're doing is they're incentivizing other options, and they hope that will get them there. It's not, but that's a good thing, because to get there would be disastrous. It would be far more expensive to get there than it would be to clean up and deal with the predicted problems of global warming and the things coming down the road. And that's assuming we don't have technology that changes us and we're not able to switch to nuclear and we're not able to make really any progress beyond where we are now.
Yeah, let me just say two things on that. First, there's a fantastic episode where Chris Williamson interviews Alex Epstein. It's the same, that's
this is Weinstein
thing. Because people pronounce them differently depending on where their name came from, blah, blah, blah. Alex Epp, as he's known.
Not to be confused with Jeffrey.
Yes. So he has a book about climate change, and he talks about it in this episode, and it's absolutely fantastic, his talking about climate change. And some of his ideas about the framework of how we're looking at it. I would definitely recommend it. Go look it up. Alex Epstein, Chris Williamson. The episode's called "Does the World Need More Fossil Fuels, Not Less?" It's really interesting. Has some really fresh ideas, worth listening to, because we don't have the time to go into a lot of climate change stuff. We want to talk about the other stuff. We don't want to go on forever. So I'm just going to say that. The other thing I want to say is that Manchin, who, is my new favorite Democrat, in order for them to pass this legislation, he had some conditions. One of those conditions was that the Democratic leadership pledged to mandate new oil and gas leasing in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Alaska. In other words, in exchange for all of this environmental stuff, they're going to do the absolute worst thing for the environment, as they put it, which is expand oil production, which is something that I think everyone can get on board with. And as Alex Epstein made the argument in his episode, you can replace fossil fuels in some instances, but there are huge segments that there is no replacement right now. Like, we've just finally got electric cars working to somewhat replace cars, but there's shipping, there's air travel, there's huge factory production that just burn straight fossil fuels that are not set up to handle electricity. So even if you could produce as much electricity as you needed. Even if we had all these nuclear reactors, we couldn't replace all these fossil fuels because there are whole industries that simply can't take electricity. You cannot get a shipping container to cross from the United States to China on electricity. It just can't be done. If you had an electric shipping container, it would have, a 20th the number of containers on it. You know what I mean? Because of the battery problem.
Yes. Yes, which hopefully gets solved eventually, but we can't act like it's been solved already, which sometimes seems to be like how people think.
So unless it's been solved, we need to keep oil production, and I, for one, would rather have that oil production not be controlled by Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So there you go.
There are half the world population, 3 billion people-ish, 3.5 billion people-ish, who desperately need cheaper energy. And so while we're over here in the US trying desperately to make our energy more expensive by making redundant systems and move to things that are less efficient, that literally is the difference between them being able to, acquire and run machinery and begin to grow and begin to develop the capital that allows for increased production, that allows for prosperity, that allows for longer lives and more of the just better lives in general, right? A longer life expectancy, but more opportunity for education, etc. All the things that come with prosperity.
Over here spoiling the episode that I just mentioned, because that is one of the things he talks about is that stable and consistent power is why we are where we are today. That it's such
fundamental
a key
to prosperity.
Element, of
absolutely
the prosperity we enjoy, and it's one of the reasons that people don't prosper in so many areas of the world. And it's true. I mean, you go and you experience even a country like Mexico, which is not a third world country, which is not nearly as destitute as many other countries. You know what I mean? Mexico's actually not doing that bad. And I've got a friend who, I think he just got to Mexico yesterday or today, and they're visiting family down there, and he talks about how the water that runs through the pipes, so they've got piping, you know what I mean? It's not a third world country. They have infrastructure. The water's turned on for 1 hour a day. 1 hour a day, and they have a big basin that they fill up. The pipe's always open so that when the water comes, it fills up so they can use it throughout the day to do dishes and all the things they need. And then if you want to drink water, you go buy bottled water because the water coming through the pipes is not clean enough. Uh-huh. And that's just one example of things that we take for granted, this infrastructure and this power infrastructure that we take for granted, that even a somewhat thriving country like Mexico.
Yes, they're actually quite prosperous comparatively. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Struggles immensely with. But there are a whole slew of other countries where the Mexican system would seem like a paradise.
Yes.
Where they're like, you have pipes where you're getting water. You have electricity 90% of the time. Amazing. You know what I mean?
It's true. People are so quick to try and make marginal improvements by increasing the cost of things. And they want to impose that across the world, not realizing that just the sheer amount of damage that does. For someone like us, a minor increase in cost has a minimal effect. It has an effect. Poverty is accompanied by an increase in disease and lower life expectancy. All the things we mentioned go down. And so it's not nothing. It's far from nothing.
Yeah, but to put it... Sorry, continue. I keep cutting you off.
You're fine. But the difference between like going from $1 a day in a poor country, right? Or like 50 cents a day is your equivalent income, to having just a tiny fraction of what we have. Like you give them $1 a day from us and you've tripled their total income, right? That's an insane improvement. By imposing standards that have a minimal impact on us and trying to get the whole world to go along with them, we're absolutely devastating, or at least preventing the growth of a lot of other places. It's a goal that only the most prosperous countries could even consider would ever be possibly worth it. And part of that is just we catastrophize what's going to happen to the climate in the world and man's impact on it. We think we must do it.
So in conclusion, for this climate section, yeah, obviously we're not thrilled about it, but it could definitely be much worse. And instead, what we're left with is malincentive, which is pretty normal, especially for the last few years. We've had a lot of the government dumping money in terrible places, and it's screwing with the economy and making our lives worse. So a little bit more of that. I'm not going to get too upset about it. I mean, that's pretty status quo.
They're saying this is the biggest bill for climate change in how long was it? Was it ever? In a long time, at least.
And
this is a huge accomplishment. Yes, if this is
that
all it is.
That makes me happy that this is all it is. I'm really glad this isn't Build Back Better.
Yes, it could be much worse.
So if you got people who are just freaking out about this bill, just take a deep breath. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Yes, and if you're really excited,
make the world a little worse.
Yes, if you're on the other end and you're really excited about this bill and you think it's going to save the world, it's not, and
it's not going to have the climate change success you think it's going to have.
No, it's certainly not.
It may not even have the carbon emission success.
I don't think so. I don't think it will.
Yeah,
we'll see, but.
Let alone the fact that carbon emission reduction wouldn't fix things like people say it would.
Yes.
Anyways, I don't want to get sucked into this. We need to talk about some more things.
You can tell we've been thinking about climate change a lot lately. I have a lot to say on it, but yeah, moving on.
Clearly, we'll need to talk about climate change in depth. Make a note, Dan. It's going on our list, short list. We'll talk about it.
Climate change.
Maybe not next week, but we'll talk about it. So next thing we're going to talk about is healthcare reform. Medicare changes. This one is not, I hate to say it, but this one's not crazy. The first thing it does, the deal allows Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And here's the kicker, for the first time. And so a lot of you are questioning, well, how does Medicare work currently? Well, they just take whatever is given them, which is not how, normally people who buy things do things, especially when people are buying a lot of something.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Because Medicare
block.
In many ways operates like
a giant insurance
or a business. You know what I mean? It operates as this actor in the market. You know what I mean? It's and it has just taken drug prices as they are and said, we'll pay it. Whatever it is, we'll pay it because we have to. We got to keep these people alive, right? So for the first time ever, what they're able to do is say, hey, we have this incredible power. We're buying billions of dollars in drugs every year. Billions and billions of dollars of drugs. We would like to pay this much and negotiate with these companies. Now, a lot of you are saying, oh, well, that's not a free market. Why would you be even generally in favor of that? Well, we've talked about this before. We like free markets. If you can find a medical free market, we'd love to see it. Outside of the Oklahoma Surgery Center. The medical system as it is not a free market. If you want to understand how drug prices work, it's nuts. Currently, U.S. drug companies actually negotiate on a regular basis for the prices of their drugs, whether that's with hospitals or with actual governments. Other countries negotiate fixed prices for drugs from these companies coming into their country, and they vary wildly, where you can have a country paying 5 times as much because they didn't have the clout to negotiate for a better price. It's so weird. It's so weird. Like, this system is bonkers. And so what this deal is doing is it's allowing Medicare to acknowledge that fact and start negotiating, which I am not opposed to.
No, they might as well. In the same way that anyone representing a big group of people should negotiate.
Yeah, exactly.
And try they might as well.
I don't think there's anything unethical about that.
No. Like you said, if this isn't a big government entity acting in a free market, this is another entity acting in a very corrupt, confused, over-legislated, really twisted market. It's such a mess. There's no reason they should be paying whatever price is given to them on this. They might as well.
And so that is definitely not a bad thing, but it's also not fixing any of the underlying problems.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's a Band-Aid solution, and we don't hate Band-Aids. They're just not saving anyone's lives.
Yeah. It's not going to stop the internal bleeding.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Couple other things it does. It caps seniors' drug costs who are on Medicare to $2,000 per year. Somewhat reasonable. And then this is my favorite part of this, because this is a relatively small part of the bill. These Medicare changes, even though any Medicare change is a huge deal. So it's however you look at that. But it forces drug companies. Now, by the way, I haven't been able to get the actual language from the bill. I haven't been able to find this in the bill, so I don't know exactly how this works. But I've got the summary, and that's all I got for now. I mean, this is all happening overnight. I mean, the bill's not done, so
it's not done, and it's almost 1,000 pages. It's like 750 pages or something.
I was at work yesterday, okay? Give me a break. It forces drug companies. I know everyone said all these mean things that I'm responding to.
Yeah,
forces drug companies.
Sorry you've been under such attack.
To pay a rebate if they increase prices faster than the rate of inflation. Which is just a backwards form of price fixing. In other words, this is the rate of inflation. Drug companies, you can't change prices more than that amount, or you'll have to pay a fee. A rebate, as they call it, which is a funny word in this context.
Yes, this is to counter the fact that, as they see it, prices are going up because of greedflation, manifest in companies price gouging their customers by increasing the cost more than they have to. And that this is this act of greed that is really damaging the economy. We addressed it in an episode about greedflation. It's a new theory created as a political necessity to try and try and save them from personal responsibility.
And as we've already covered, the medical industry is nuts, but this is a step in the direction towards price fixing because of greedflation. And so that just makes me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. What this will actually look like in drug companies in the real world, I'm not sure. I'm less concerned with that and more concerned with the implication of where this is heading. Because price fixing in the general economy could be devastating. And that's something I definitely want to warn against.
Yes, I think you framed it very well there. The actual impact of this law may be fine, but the motivation behind it and the theory and it may be fine because it's being thrown into a mess that is silly anyway. But if you try and introduce that to the broader market, it would be terrible, and I would go from being like, as you've put it, uncomfortable to freaking out. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to centrally plan the economy again?
Yeah, exactly. That's the real fear. Anything else you want to say about that, Dan? Before I think
it's really good.
Okay. I'm glad you think it's really good, because those people were saying mean things.
I'm sorry about that, Brad.
It was terrible.
You can cry on my shoulder later. Yeah.
I'm going to go cry myself to sleep tonight.
On your wife's shoulder while she talks to everybody about the stuff that people are going to call her about.
Yes, you can't remember the nuclear feeder system.
That's right.
Yeah, so
couldn't remember the specific system.
Yeah. When they call her about the stuff they're going to call her about. I liked that.
This third thing that we're going to talk about, Brad blew my mind with this. He found this, and this is by far, to me, the most interesting thing in here.
Yes. First of all, why is this not being talked about more?
I don't know.
This tax increase. It's mentioned like as a small paragraph. Like you're going to link the MSN article, right?
Yes. So you'll have a great
by the
summary.
Washington Post.
Yeah.
Is that the same article I'm looking at Yahoo News? I hope it is.
Well, I shared it with you. Oh my goodness,
it's the same article.
Everyone's got it.
Dan, me and you have been reading off of the same article from different sources back to Washington Post. That makes me happy.
So what we're saying, this is classic academic. We just cite two sources, but we actually only had one. They're just the same source from a different place.
You should put my article up there too, as well as yours.
So we've got lots of backing on this. What this article is doing is it summarizes some of the specific changes. So it's not anything dramatic. We're not citing the same study twice or something like that.
Anyways, as you've seen in my Yahoo News, what was I going to say? Yes, in this article,
it's a blip.
It's a blip. They've got a bunch of paragraphs, a bunch of different sections, and they've got like 2 small paragraphs and only 1 small paragraph talking about the corporate tax. It's 2 small paragraphs, 1 section amongst how many sections do they have? 14 sections. So 1/14 of this article is talking about this corporate tax increase. I had to go to another article to find more details about it because this one was like, it's a corporate tax increase, 15% minimum, woohoo. At least that's how the Yahoo News one sounded. I don't know what the MSN one sounded like. Probably a different voice.
Probably. It had a deeper, more manly voice. I only read my news in the bass clef. So the majority of the tax revenue that's being raised, $313 billion in the next 10 years, is coming from a new corporate tax. Now, this new corporate tax, as I explained to Dan earlier, is nuts because what it is you currently have a 21% tax rate for U.S. corporations. And how that tax rate works is the same, except more complicated as it works for you or me, where you report your income, you report deductions of varying degrees, you recalculate these numbers, and then as a result, you pay a tax rate that is different than it would be if you didn't do any of those deductions, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously. That's why you do the deductions. They even have standard deductions because that's built into the system. And that's how corporations do it too. Well, what this does, it says, okay, you do that and you keep it all exactly the same. After you've done all of that, you need to take a look at your income. And if you're not paying 15% taxes on that income, then you got to pay more anyways. I understand that all of these deductions are things that we agreed upon already, and we're still agreeing upon and still keeping. But if those deductions result in you having too much savings, then we're just going to say screw it, and you have to pay it. That's the first wild thing, is that they're not getting rid of those deductions, or they're not getting rid of the worst of those deductions, or the bad deductions, or the deductions that shouldn't be there. They're keeping all of them, but they're saying these deductions can't save you very much money. Yes, if you were to think of it, we think of it in terms of loopholes. The idea being there's a hole and people are sneaking through it. Rather than fixing the holes, we've created a second fence on the other side.
And that fence says we will only let through a certain percentage of those loopholes, and then we'll stop it. We're not going to cut it off, because they're not saying, hey, you have to pay 21% no matter what. They're saying, no, you can save money up to 6%, going from 21% to 15%. But then after that, we're gonna cut it. Now, on top of that, this number is going to be calculated in a completely new way. Because right now, you calculate federal income tax based off of these IRS requirements, right? Like anything else. Mm-hmm. It's always based off of what the IRS tells you. This number will not be calculated that way at all. It is going to be completely independent, and it's going to be based off of your book income. And I say your, like you own one of these billion-dollar companies, Dan. But maybe I should say your
I own
Jeff
two.
Bezos or your right. Elon Musk. Your book income, which is calculated based off of standard accounting practices and are completely separate from the IRS system. Now that right there is wild, because it, to me, seems like an acknowledgement that the whole IRS system in terms of these corporations just isn't working. It's not capturing what's actually going on like their own books are. And so they're saying scrap keep everything the IRS is doing, but ignore it. You know what I mean? For the most part. Keep what the IRS is doing, but we're also going to have a secondary system where we calculate the number based off of how you calculate it for your own personal finances, and then we're going to tax you 15% on that.
Yes. Yes, if you're under 15% of that, your new tax rate is 15% of that.
Yeah, 15% of that, not the IRS number.
Yeah, you can scrap the other things at that point. Once you've compared the numbers and you find you're under.
So, really weird.
It's so weird. The tax code, as it is a nightmare. You were saying basically they do the same thing we do, plus 40,000 pages of loopholes.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus a few more steps with 40,000 pages.
Their deductions are much more complicated and numerous than ours.
Yes, there's literally 40,000 pages, I think is understating it. I can't remember how long the tax code is at this point, and almost all of it applies to corporations and businesses, not you and me. Mm-hmm. Not ordinary people filing their personal taxes. It's so odd that they're doing it this way. I thought...
Oh, and I forgot to mention one thing, Dan, before we get too far into this. This only applies to corporations that earn more than $1 billion per year in profits. So these are not even... So if you took the Fortune 500 companies, not all of those companies would fit this definition. It's something around 455 companies is their best guess, because it changes year to year, because it's profits. You could have a $10 billion company that doesn't hit this mark, you know. Twitter may not hit this mark, you know. They need profits to do that.
Yeah. Twitter's I think they make like, what was it, 100 million? They're a long ways from this.
No, but seriously, that's nuts. You know, you can have a company like Twitter valued at 40 billion that could ignore this because they're not making $1 billion per year in profits. Now, of course, this gets more complicated because how are you calculating those profits? I don't know. I haven't read the exact wording of this, but it's nuts. Now, first of all, I don't want to come across as just negative on this. I think it's fascinating. I think that this is the most interesting thing to happen to taxes. Not the biggest tax increase, but the most interesting thing generally. And it kind of gets me excited because what you have is the Democrats saying, not explicitly, but implicitly, hey, there are some serious problems with the way the IRS tax code system works, to the point that if we want businesses to pay taxes, we kind of need to scrap that whole system. We kind of need to throw the whole book out and say, hey, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to come up, and this is what this law does. They're saying we're going to calculate it based off of this separate, independent of the IRS number. We're going to throw out all of those deductions, and then what they did is they actually added in new deductions. You know, because you may be asking, okay, well, what about these green tax credits that are being proposed? What's the point of those if people can't benefit from them? No, there's an exception for those. So you can apply those to that 15% and lower it. Well, what about a few other things, like if you have a net loss that year or this and that? Well, they've added some things in as well. So they're not saying we want no exceptions. They're saying the current exceptions are nuts. So what we've done is we've created a new tax code for 455 companies. And of course, you may be asking, if this is such a great solution and reasonable, then why not apply it to all corporations? And of course, the implication is that it's punitive, that it's not going to be easy to do. And that seems pretty reasonable, because the reason the IRS tax code is the way it is they have calculations for this is how you get their number. If you're having it be based off of their book income, that's going to get complicated for their accountants real quick, is my guess. Figuring this out, figuring out how to navigate this is going to be a mess for these companies. Like, I'm sure whoever's in charge of paying taxes for these companies is bending over backwards right now, figuring out what they're going to have to do.
Yes, I wonder if in practice they're going to basically have to audit each of the companies that this applies to.
That would not surprise me.
And they could do that if it's 450 of them. And whereas and actually follow up and see their books and actually review things like that. But you can't do that with everybody. Despite the fact that this among the other things in this bill that we won't spend much time on it, they're injecting $80 billion into the IRS as part of this bill.
Huge amount of money.
It's so much money. I don't know what their total funding is, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's more than their total funding. Do it. So they're injecting $80 billion into the IRS, And they expect that by injecting that 80 billion, they will bring in 120 billion in added revenue. Is that because the IRS spends their spare time digging gold? Of course not. It's because the IRS is going to use that money to audit more and find more people who are not paying enough their taxes, and thus the end result will be an increase in taxes brought in to the tune of 120 billion. You improve the tax collector. I am ready for the number.
So the IRS's actual expenditures for the fiscal year 2021 for overall operations was $13.7 billion.
So 80 billion.
Now, 80 billion is not going to be dumped in all at once. My guess is it's going to be
over several
like 10
years.
Yeah. But still, we're talking a more than 50% increase in their operating budget.
Even if
in
it's
all practicality.
10 years or something. That's intense. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. If you're looking for a job, I suppose you could go work for the IRS.
Because they're probably going to be hiring some more people.
Hiring some bouncers to go claim their money. They go shake you down, right? That's how this works.
They're going to be shaking Jeff Bezos upside down to see what falls out.
To see what falls out. Tell him if he doesn't have the money by next week, they're going to knock him on the head and throw him in the river. I'm pretty sure that's how the IRS works.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
They just need more of those
That's
guys.
what auditing feels like.
So back to this tax change. It is so trippy that they would, even on a limited scale of just these 450-ish businesses, give or take, and changing from year to year, that they're going to do this. Now, the political incentive makes sense. They've always been, the popularity on the left is to, popular opinion points us to go and tax the rich, right? And certainly the 450 most rich, most profitable businesses in a given year fit the description of the rich.
Yeah, exactly. Because these are companies that brought in a profit of $1 billion or more.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So these obviously are rich by any definition.
By any definition, yes. So this is an interesting way, by targeting the richest corporations, to try and tax the richest people to pay for this increase in taxes, right? It's very novel in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. It doesn't read like a tax the rich scheme.
Yeah.
It reads like a close the
fixing
loopholes.
The loopholes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. But in practice, it's a tax the rich scheme, and it's very clever, and it's very novel. And the modifications on the tax code are trippy. And I've never been a tax the rich person. I'm more like, corporations have some fundamental legal issues that give them privileges they shouldn't have, and thus they're a mixed bag, and we need to take a nuanced look.
Which is a serious problem with corporations, yes. But is very different.
Yes, but it's very different. So I'm not against. I feel like the people who have a sense that, often people who have little sense, no idea how economics or politics works, it's not what they're looking into. It's not because they're stupid. It's just they have a life, unlike me, where they look at other things.
What are you saying, Dan?
I'm saying it's not them, it's me. That's what I'm saying. But the point is that they have a sense that corporations are screwing them over, and they're right. The how is more complicated and more to do with the legal benefits and principles that have been established under the table for centuries. Often.
And we've talked about this before, is that this is a novel idea and it's interesting, but when push comes to shove, if the deductions are bad, we should just get rid of the deductions.
Yes.
You know what I mean? This is another really weird and unusual and interesting Band-Aid solution, but it still is, in terms of, even if you say, hey, these corporations should be paying more taxes, then maybe you
I'm fine with a new tax system. Let's get rid of the old one.
Reform the current tax system or replace it.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping the current tax system and then adding a second tax system on top of it is nuts.
Yeah,
right?
to run with our medical analogy, it's time to change the bandages on the wound, and everyone can see that. And we're just putting another Band-Aid on top of the old ones. Right? We're going to get infection. There's going to be problems. I like the new Band-Aid. It's got Batman on it, and I like Batman.
Well, yeah, and it's a better Band-Aid. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's a better design, but it doesn't do you enough good until you take off the old ineffective Band-Aid so that the new Band-Aid can do its work.
Yeah, and we don't
There's
get
a lot
the
of Band-Aid
infection
analogies.
We're just going to keep pushing this analogy for the rest of our episodes.
Because if our analogy's not good, we're going to apply a new Band-Aid to that analogy.
We'll patch it
until it's good.
Holes in fences, patches, Band-Aids.
Exactly. Which is really just Band-Aids. These are all words for Band-Aids.
We only have one ability to think in terms of Band-Aids. Everything else is just a Band-Aid parallel. Really,
a Band-Aid solution for our Band-Aid analogy.
For our Band-Aid. Really, though, like you said, this is the most interesting thing, in my opinion, to happen here. And I can actually get behind it and see it as a good thing in the sense that it acknowledges the tax code is really screwed up.
Yeah, this is in many ways a step in the right direction.
It is. We can say, yeah, you're right. You're right. This is better than what we had before. And we needed to patch all kinds of holes.
Because fundamentally, in terms of tax systems, if corporations should be taxed, which is a separate discussion, then yes, companies that are making over $1 billion shouldn't be getting away with paying zero taxes when corporations that are making $1 million a year are paying 21% in practice.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yes. If you accept the principle, which we would argue with, but if you accept it, then it should be applied consistently. It should be, absolutely. And especially if you accept the idea that as your income increases, you should be taxed more, then...
And we don't accept that, but at least this isn't pushing for that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
We'll buy...
It's not pushing for more taxes for the rich. It's pushing for actually tax the rich. This is a Band-Aid version of like something like a fair tax. You know what I mean?
It echoes it for sure.
It echoes it.
Some kind of fair tax.
It misses a bunch of the key components, so don't get carried away there. But it definitely echoes some of those ideas, some of those goals.
Yes, I feel like we could talk to the people behind this, and we'd have a lot of things we agree on. I mean, we could reason with them and be like, yeah, this is better in a variety of ways, and that's a good sign. The desire to innovate past the however many tens of thousands of pages the tax code is, and to bypass it completely, isn't that far from being like it. We just need to scrap it and let's get it off the books. For now, they can't do that. For now, you would offend everybody who's lobbied so hard for each of those loopholes. But this is an interesting way to be like, no, we're keeping the loopholes. Which is you can see the political reasoning behind it.
We're just reducing their effectiveness.
We're just going to reduce their effectiveness in the extreme situations where you're paying less than 15% of.
And only if you're one of these 450.
Yes.
And only the even smaller number of those companies who aren't currently paying that tax rate, because many of them are. You know, there's this understanding that if you're uber rich, you're not paying any taxes, you know, and I know people like Elon have gotten upset about that. They're like, no, I'm paying a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyways,
it's trippy, and it makes me curious who the minds are behind this part of it, because this part of the bill seems very clever, very brilliant in ways that the rest of it is kind of predictable. The healthcare changes were somewhat surprising and nice, at least okay.
So in terms of tax increases, this is a breath of fresh air. I don't want a tax increase, but this is the best I could have. You know, this is the most. I want to word this correctly, but I don't know how. It was surprisingly pleasant, and I'm not upset by it. Doesn't mean I'm in favor of it, but it's not pissing me off.
And to have a tax increase with a bill that spends is the only thing that makes sense.
Is also so fiscally responsible. Where has that been
so
in the past
refreshing.
3 years?
Yes, let's tax.
Pay for what we're doing.
Yeah. Yes, instead of spending interest and paying for it in other ways and inflation and things. This is for the same reason you should pay off your debt. This is a better way to do it.
So I mean, Build Back Better, we were staunchly opposed to. This bill, I never would have voted for it.
I don't care for spending another $400 and something billion.
Yeah, because like I said, the main goals like climate change, the proposals are ineffective. They're malinvestment. It's not good, but it could have been so much worse.
Yes.
The healthcare reform, it's a Band-Aid solution, but it's not awful. There's not going to be a bunch of restrictions on businesses in terms of CO2 emissions and fossil fuels. In fact, there's going to be some opportunity for more oil drilling. In terms of taxes, it seems like an interesting, fresh idea that's not going to be as devastating as many other tax options could be. And so all in all, it's a whole lot better than it could have been. And it's a whole lot better than Build Back Better was, and it could have been a whole lot worse.
It really could have. It seems fairly reasonable. I guess we'll pause there. With our pleasant surprise at how how not awful this is. It's not good, but not awful.
But in terms of the goals, and when the goal of the bill is climate change and raising taxes,
yes.
You know what? This bill's not bad.
Not bad. And with that, thank you for listening.
This has been an episode of Rethinking Politics. You can find us on all of the major podcasting apps or on YouTube. You can reach out to us at rethinkingpoliticspodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit our website at rethinkingpolitics.podbean.com, where you can support us via Patreon. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.